Hello everyone. In this video and more than 20 more videos, I'm gonna talk about basics of C++ programming. So I decided to make a new playlist called C++ and put some lectures, short lectures about basics of C++. So let's get started. The first video is I/O basic, input-output basics. So basically asking user to provide you with some information, reading it, assigning it to some variables, and showing some messages on the screen for the user to see, some interactions. So the first thing is, if you want to add a comment, which is basically any line of code that the compiler will not compile and will not do anything about it, basically just ignore it, is if you want to add such a thing, you have to use either double forward slash, or you can use forward slash plus an asterisk. Now, what's the difference here? If you want to comment a line, a single line, behind that you put a what? You put these double backslashes like that, and it goes gray, and that means it is commented out. By the way, I'm doing all of my coding in code blocks, okay, which is quite a bit easier to use compared to Visual Studio. Now, if you want to put a bunch of code in a block of comments, because if you want to comment a block, let's say these 3 lines, I want to comment them out, then I have to use these double what? These double forward slashes behind each and every one of the lines. But an easier way to do it is, before that block starts, you go with a forward slash and an asterisk, and after that block, again, you go with an asterisk and the forward slash, and then that whole block is commented out, right? So you put it between these 2 sets of characters, right, or keys. And that will be a comment block. So I want you to know the difference between a single line comment and a block comment. Now, the first thing you need to do is to include the library called IO stream, input output stream. And to include any library, what is a library? We're going to talk about it in a separate video. But library is basically the bunch of commands and code that you want to use over and over, and so you write it as a library, you make it a library, those code. So just by including the name of the file or the header, you can use the code, the functions that are available in that library over and over again. And to include the code, right, previously written and usable, use the keyword include, and behind that use the pound sign, and you put the name inside this basically 2 symbols, right, bigger than and less than. So that is one thing you want to do, right? And this IO stream is when you want to use commands like cin and cout. What are these commands? These are to read values from the user, from the screen, and type something to the screen, okay? We're going to see them in a minute. But if you want to use those objects, if you want to use these commands or objects, basically, you have to include IO stream. And if you want to perform any math, okay, any specific arithmetics or math, like here, I'm going to use this number mpi, which is pi, number pi, basically. I have to use another library called CMath. Okay, this is the math library for C++ and C. And if I want to, as you're going to see in my next video or 2 videos from now, for basic arithmetics, you want to use sine function, cosine function, you want to use the number pi or so many other things, you have to use that library as well. So now, the next line of code that you see I'm using is using namespace std, which is the standard namespace. And what is this one? Here I'm defining the namespace std, and I'm saying, I'm not defining, I'm saying I'm using that namespace. And what is a namespace? So here I've written something for you, but I have a separate video on namespaces. So namespaces are basically the things that you use in C++ to let the compiler know if there are several functions or variables with the same name under different libraries or in different parts of your code. When you call those functions or those variables, compiler will be confused. Like if you have two functions with the exact same name, sign, or two variables with the same name, but from different libraries, right? They are both called MPy. If you do that, then the compiler will have no idea which one it is going to be used, and it is gonna use, and it is gonna compile. So here I'm saying, hey, if you see something called cin and cout, these are the objects from which namespace, from the namespace standard. Okay, and so if you see anything similar to those or any other functions similar to the ones that you see in IOStream, then be sure that we are referring to the ones in this standard. And I tell you, if we don't use this line, what is it that we have to do when we use the cin and cout commands, right, or objects? When we want to use those, we have to do something extra, and that is using this double column operator, okay? So we use this, so every time we use cin and cout, we don't have to do something like this, okay, or something like this. Because this way I'm saying that, hey, if you see a cout or cin, that is coming from the standard library. But when I say, hey, I'm using the standard library, I know which cin and which cout I'm talking about. Therefore, all I use is just cin or just what? Cout. I do not use this to say cout belongs to the standard library, or I do not use this to say cin belongs to the standard library. Okay, so this is going to save us some writing in the code that is followed. So I talked about all of those. So these are including libraries, saying that's which namespace and commands coming from which namespace. Now, your main code here is your main code. And your main code starts with a function called main. This main function, you don't need to accept any argument for it, no input to this function, right? So you see inside the parentheses, it's empty. We have a separate video on functions, and we'll talk about functions. But if the function has any inputs, it is going to go inside these parentheses. This main function does not accept anything, and it might or might not return anything. Typically, what they do standard is this function returns a 0. When is it that it returns a 0? If the whole function main is executed successfully. So if everything runs without any error, then this function is going to return a 0, so you know everything ran just fine. Okay, it's a common standard that this function typically returns a 0. Now, in C++, whenever you write any block of code for a function, for a loop, for decision making like ifs, else, and so on, they have to be written inside braces. So you see all of the code for this function is written inside braces. So what is the first step that you have to do? Is to define variables. I have my next video on variables and constants, and one of the important things when you write C++ is to define your variables and say what kind of variable they are. C++ is not like MATLAB. It is not going to find the type of the variable by itself. You have to type the variable for it. If something is an integer, if something is a string, is a character, is a Boolean variable, or anything, you have to tell C what kind of variable it is. So you see I'm defining a type and then defining the name for that variable. So here I have a string of first name, a string of last name, and then an age, which is an integer. Now, if you want your age to have decimals, then you have to say float instead of what? Instead of integer. So you have to say something like this, or you have to say double. Again, we're going to talk about those types of variables in the next video. So here I define 3 variables. Then what do I say? I say cout, and then these two, the output stream, right? These 2 less than signs, when you put them after each other, that's an output stream. I say, hey, on the screen for me, show what? Show this message. All of this message, I want you to show it on the screen. What is it? To say, hello, fans of Engineering Educator Academy channel, and then \n. What is \n? Means whenever you show this message on the screen, take the cursor to the next line. So if you want to write something afterwards, that text should not be written on the same line with this. It should be, this guy is going to be written on the next line. So this is called carriage return, and it takes the cursor to the next line. By the way, any text, any string in C++ is going to be written in double quotations. It's different from single quotations. You're not going to use single quotations. Single quotation is reserved for characters only. If you have a text, right, a string, you have to write it into what? Into double quotations. The other thing important in C++ is every line of command should be terminated with a semicolon. If you don't have the semicolon, you're going to get an error. So here, I'm saying, hey, show this text on the screen, take the cursor to the next line, then show the next line, which is saying, we are going to start basic C++ lectures now. And then cout end line. So this end line command here basically acts very, very similar to this \n. Right? Here at the end of this now, you see I did not use a \n. Therefore, this next line is going to be written after this, not in a new line. So instead of me using \n, I use end line, which end that line and go to the next line. So that is acting very similar to this part. But in order for me to use this, I do not need a separate text like this. So I add \n at the end of it. So this \n, you see I'm using it at the end of a text. This end line does not need any text. I just use end line. Okay? Then once I go to the new line, I say, hope you like it. Go to the new line, and then this end line here, since this one is already taking me what? To the next line. This new end line is just creating a blank space for me, a blank line. So between the end of this part and showing this number pi with 6 places, 6 numbers, basically I'm gonna have a blank line here. I'm gonna have a line that nothing is written on it. Now, what am I gonna do next? I'm saying, hey, show me number m pi, but before that, I'm asking for 6 numbers. I'm adding a dot operator for the object cout, and the cout has a method called precision, which allows me to display a number with as many decimals as I want. So instead of showing me m pi with regular decimals, I'm asking for 6. Now you might say, what would happen if you don't show this? So let me run this and show you what's going to happen. So here, we're going to go build and run. So here are those 3 lines that I told you. Here is that blank line. And here is what? Here is this number pi, 314159. Yes, that's the number. Now here, as I told you, I can change the number of decimals to anything I want. If I don't use it, you see I had how many decimals? 5 decimals. So here I say, hey, I want it with 10 decimals, right? Show me number pi, but before that, set the precision to 10. And then show me the number, right? By the way, you see here, if I say in C++ pi, pi is not recognized by C++. It's not like MATLAB or some other software like SolidWorks that have pi. If I want the number pi, I have to say m_pi. And I can use this m_pi as a constant or variable or anything if and only if I include the CMath library. Otherwise, I cannot use this guy. So here I'm saying, hey, use 10 places. Let's see what happens. You see here? Now look, 3, 6, 9, and then 10. So when you say 10, it doesn't mean necessarily 10 decimals, it means 10 meaningful digits. 9 of them for pi are after decimal and 1 is before decimal. So 10 is, again, not all decimals, it's the number of meaningful places. So if you want 10 decimals for pi, you have to use 11 here. So 1 is used for 3 10 decimals. Look here, you see? Now you got 10 decimals. Good. What's next? So here I showed you some text. Instead of hello world that you always see, I showed some different text. I showed you a number, pi, which is very important in our calculations. And now here I want to do some interactions. This time, instead of pure text showing on the screen, I want to ask you to give me some info, and then I combine your info and some text, predefined text, and I show you some more complicated text this time. So the first thing I do, I say, hey, type your age for me. And then I say, read the age, read that number and assign it to the variable age using the cin command. So when you see these two, these are stream in, right? This bigger than, right? That is stream in. So what am I saying in this line? Several things. I say read whatever the user is typing in the screen, whatever number that they type, you read it in, and then you assign it to the variable what? Age. By the way, this age should be what? Should be an integer. So if the user is not going to enter an integer, but a float number, you're going to have some problems here. So you better tell the user, use an integer number. So the user knows they should not enter 38.3, they should just enter 38 or 39. Get it, assign it to the variable age, then ask for the first name and last name, separated by a space. And then what? Read the first variable, the first thing that the user types, assign it to the variable first name, read the second thing that the user types after a space, assign it to the variable last name. So with the cin command, you don't have to only read one variable at a time, you can read several variables using one cin command. As long as they are separated by space, you can read several inputs and assign them to several variables. And then with cout, it's not like every time I can only show pure text or pure number. I can combine everything. So what am I saying here? I say hello, then put that variable first name, whatever the user types, show it back to them, use some space, then last name, use some space, then age, and then years old. So you see here, I'm combining variables of different types. These two are strings, that one is an integer, and some predefined text and white space. I'm combining all of them and writing it as a basically a complicated text and show it on the screen. So let's take a look now. So you see it is asking for my age, so I say 38. Then it says what's your first name and last name, so I type in my first name space my last name, and then it says okay, hello Mehran and Delibi, 30 years old, 38 years old, right? So you see it combined that info and these info with some predefined text, and it gives me this complicated text, right? And then it returned a 0 because everything went fine here. Now you see between this return 0 and between this text there is no space like that. But I can add it, right? I can add a \n first of all, so the control goes to the next line, and then I can use one of these to create a blank line. So now it should basically give me some extra space here. Let's do it again. You see? There we go. Okay, so hopefully add one thing here as well, so I have all the spaces. So hopefully you have seen how to work with the commands cin and cout, how you can make complicated text. All you need is between the parts of that complicated text, you need this stream out symbol, basically. And you can read several inputs from cin and assign them to the variable. You have to define the types of the variables before using them anywhere. And very, very basic about namespace and libraries. Okay, as I said, we're going to have separate video on library, separate video on namespace, and separate video on functions. So we're going to talk about all of these separately, but this is just very, very basic. Hopefully this video was useful to you. I'll see you in my next lecture.